My name is Aurora Bennett. I'm 35 years old, and yes, I'm technically retired. Not because someone handed me a fortune or because I married rich, but because I worked my ass off for over a decade, lived like a minimalist, and invested every extra dollar like my life depended on it. No fancy vacations. No designer handbags. Just spreadsheets, discipline, and delayed gratification. I did it all without a penny from my parents. They didn't pay for college. They didn't co-sign a single loan. And they certainly weren't around to offer emotional support when I pulled 70-hour weeks while putting myself through night school. But now that I've finally built something solid, they've come knocking. Not for themselves, of course. It's for James, my older brother, the golden child. The one who could do no wrong even when his tech startup lost 6 figures in investor money and he got sued for breach of contract. The one who ignored advice, blew through his savings, and then moved back in with our parents like nothing happened. Now they're looking at me, the black sheep who made it, as if I'm the family's lifeline. They want me to cash out my retirement account, liquidate my investments, start over for him. They actually said, "It's what family does." I wanted to laugh, or cry, or maybe both. 'Cause where was what family does when I needed them? If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I grew up in a small suburban town where everyone knew each other's business and reputations stuck like glue. From the time we were kids, James was the sun around which our entire household orbited. My parents, Robert and Susan Carter, acted like he'd been born under some rare cosmic alignment, destined for greatness. He was smart, charming, and knew exactly how to win people over. Teachers adored him. Neighbors praised him. My parents? They practically worshipped him. And me? I was the girl in his shadow. I wasn't slow or rebellious, I just wasn't James. I was the quiet one, the studious one, kid who stayed late after school to finish projects or help clean up. But to my parents, I was hardworking, which in our family was code for not naturally gifted. I still remember my mother saying with a smile, "James is brilliant, Aurora. He'll go far on brains alone. You're a fighter. You'll make it through grit." They didn't mean it to be cruel. But that's the thing about favoritism, it rarely announces itself with malice. It's subtle. A second helping on James's plate. A slightly longer hug. The way Dad's eyes lit up when James talked about his plans for Stanford, while mine, despite being equally ambitious, were met with polite nods. Even when we were teenagers, the double standard followed us like a shadow. James wrecked Dad's car once, speeding with his friends on a Friday night. My parents paid for the damages and chalked it up to boys being boys. When I came home 10 minutes after curfew from a school fundraiser, I got grounded for 2 weeks and had my phone taken away. By the time I was 16, I understood the unspoken family hierarchy. James was the investment. I was the insurance policy. It wasn't all resentment. I loved my brother in my own way, but it was hard to ignore how different the rules were for us. He failed upward, landing softly each time, cushioned by our parents' unwavering belief in his potential. I was expected to land on my feet, no matter the fall, so I learned to depend on myself. I took AP classes, worked part-time jobs, and applied for every scholarship I could find. My parents attended James's debate tournaments with front-row enthusiasm. For my senior science fair, where I won second place statewide, they congratulated me over dinner while scrolling their phones. That's when something in me quietly broke. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. If I wanted a good life, it wouldn't come from applause or affirmation. It would come from effort, from showing up every single day for myself. And I did. But no amount of success ever changed the story in their heads. James was the gifted son who stumbled. I was the steady daughter who would always be there to clean up. Now they expect me to prove it. After high school, I didn't move across the country or chase some big city dream. I stayed close to home and enrolled in a state university, not out of fear but practicality. I didn't have a college fund, no safety net. What I had was a part-time waitressing job, a stack of financial aid forms, and the unshakable belief that I could build something better for myself. I worked almost every day. Weekends meant double shifts at the diner. Weeknights were spent tutoring high school students in math and English. I even picked up freelance writing gigs online, anything that paid. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. But it taught me more than any lecture hall ever could. I learned how to budget down to the penny. I learned to stretch a $20 grocery bill across 5 meals. And more importantly, I learned that I could rely on myself. When other students went out drinking on Friday nights, I stayed in and read books on personal finance and investing. I devoured everything I could: compound interest, index funds, Roth IRAs. While my classmates chased internships at flashy startups, I focused on building a foundation that couldn't be shaken. Through graduation, I landed an entry-level job in the tech industry, not one of those unicorn companies with nap pods and stock options, but a stable, quiet firm that paid decently. I didn't have to love it. I just had to use it. And I did. I climbed slowly, deliberately, learning skills, taking on new responsibilities, and making sure I never lived above my means. When my friends were buying new cars or taking international vacations, I was taking the bus and packing lunch from home. My wardrobe was functional. My apartment was modest. Every extra dollar went into my future. I maxed out my 401k contributions as early as I could. I opened a Roth IRA and fed it religiously. I studied the market, chose diversified index funds, and held tight even when things dipped. I lived on less than half of my income, not because I had to, but because I had a plan. My motto was simple: if you can live on half your income, you're already halfway to freedom. And over time, it worked. Year after year, my portfolio grew. I didn't chase get-rich-quick schemes. I didn't gamble on crypto or try to time the market. I just kept doing the boring, consistent work that builds wealth quietly. And after 10 years, the numbers told me something incredible: I didn't have to work anymore. 35, I reached financial independence. I remember the moment it hit me. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and planning software. The math wasn't magic. It was real. I could afford to step away, take a breath, to finally live life on my terms. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream about what came next. Maybe I'd travel, see the places I used to only read about. Or maybe I'd open that little coffee shop I used to sketch in my notebook during college. Kind with warm lighting, quiet music, and shelves of secondhand books. I didn't know exactly what the next chapter would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. I had earned it. Every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, every choice I made that others laughed at, I carried them all with me into this freedom. And it felt like the first breeze after a long, suffocating summer. But that's the thing about finally getting ahead. Just when you think you're free, someone comes knocking, and they want what you built. While I was clipping coupons and brewing coffee at home, James was living a completely different life. From the moment he got his acceptance letter from a prestigious private university, my parents practically burst with pride. It wasn't just any school, it was one of those elite institutions where students walked around in blazers, name-dropped internships at Fortune 500 companies, and networked like their lives depended on it. To my parents, it wasn't a cost, it was an investment. They paid for almost everything: tuition, housing, meal plans, even an allowance for living expenses. The message was clear. James needed space to grow, to flourish, to chase his limitless potential. And James? He accepted it all without hesitation. No guilt. No second thoughts. He wore their support like a tailored suit, comfortable, expected, and perfectly fitted to the role he believed he was born to play. He thrived socially in college. Surrounded by ambition and wealth, James blended right in. He made friends with people whose parents were CEOs and lawyers. He attended galas, fundraisers, and weekend retreats. It was a world I had only seen on TV, and for a time I was genuinely happy for him. He was charismatic, articulate, and driven, or at least that's how it seemed. After graduation, James landed a high-paying job right out of the gate. It was all my parents needed to feel justified. "Sim," my mom would say, her voice full of I told her. We believed in him, and now it's paying off. But beneath the surface, something was off. He couldn't sit still. Every 6 months, he was on to something new. A different job title. A shinier company name. A more impressive business card. He was chasing prestige the way a gambler chases the next big win, always convinced the next hand would be the one. And he was making money, good money. But he spent it just as fast. James moved into a luxury high-rise apartment downtown, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and concierge service. He upgraded his wardrobe with designer suits, Italian leather shoes, and limited edition watches. Every new iPhone launch, he had it. He hosted dinner parties where the wine cost more than my monthly grocery bill. And to him, it was normal. Expected. I never said anything, but I noticed. I noticed when he brushed off budgeting as something boring people do. I noticed when he laughed about forgetting to pay a credit card bill because late fees are just the cost of convenience. I noticed how often he needed a small transfer from our parents to hold him over until the next paycheck. And then came the big idea, the startup. He called me one evening, voice buzzing with excitement. "I'm building something huge," he said. "A game changer. You'll see." And I believed him. Despite everything, I admired his ambition. He wanted to create a tech company that would streamline digital marketing for small businesses, smart concept, solid pitch. Our parents were ecstatic. They poured in support, financial, emotional, whatever he needed. They saw it as his defining moment. But within 10 months, it all unraveled. James had overhired, overspent, and underdelivered. The burn rate was unsustainable, and the projections had been wildly optimistic. Investors pulled out. Vendors stopped answering his calls. Employees didn't get their final paychecks. The sleek office space was vacated overnight. What was left? Debt. Lots of it. Tens of thousands on credit cards. Standing invoices. Personal guarantees on equipment leases. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the news article that quietly covered the collapse, a 3-paragraph blip buried beneath headlines about celebrity divorces and election polls. No one came to bail James out this time, except my parents. They scrambled to cover what they could, liquidated part of their retirement, took out a home equity loan. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. And that's when they turned to me. Every time James hit a bump in the road, our parents were right there with the safety net. Behind on rent? They wired the money. Needed a deposit for a new apartment? They pulled from their savings. Car repairs, medical bills, business loans, whatever the situation, they'd find a way to fix it for him. It wasn't just support, it was a habit, an expectation. James stumbled and they stepped in. Again and again. Meanwhile, I hadn't asked them for a single dime since the day I stepped onto my college campus. Not when I was working double shifts. Not when my laptop crashed in the middle of finals week. Not even when I couldn't afford heat for my apartment one brutal winter. I figured out my own way. That was my path. So when I told them I had retired early at 35, I genuinely thought they'd be proud. I had built something real without shortcuts, without handouts. I remember standing in their kitchen, explaining how my investments had grown, how I'd planned for years to get to this point. James gave me a vague, half-hearted congrats while looking at his phone. But my parents? They smiled politely, tight-lipped, hollow, then changed the subject. First, I thought maybe it was just surprise. Maybe they needed time to process the idea that I, the daughter who never got the spotlight, had done something extraordinary. But it didn't take long before the truth surfaced. They began dropping hints, casual comments over dinner like, "Family takes care of each other," or "Everyone faces tough seasons." They praised James for being resilient and brilliant under pressure. The narrative slowly shifted. He wasn't reckless, just misunderstood. Not irresponsible, just unlucky. Eventually, they stopped being subtle. One evening, after a quiet family dinner, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was soft, but her words were sharp. She said James was overwhelmed with debt, that it was affecting his mental health. Then came the dagger. "You've been so lucky, Aurora. With your career, your investments. Maybe it's time you helped your brother get back on his feet." I took a slow breath and said I'd think about it. Not because I intended to say yes, but because I wanted the conversation to end. I hoped that would be enough. It wasn't. Pressure escalated. They started suggesting I could always return to work for a few more years, that it wasn't a big deal to postpone my early retirement. Then, astonishingly, they brought up Claire, my wife. They hinted she could take on more hours, maybe even a second job, so that I could have some flexibility to assist James. That was the moment the line was crossed. Claire had been my rock. She stood by me through every late night, every sacrifice, every calculated decision. She never once questioned why I wouldn't splurge on a new car or why our vacations were always budgeted down to the penny. She believed in the life we were building. And now my parents, who barely acknowledged her role in my journey, were suggesting she shoulder more so James could fall upward once again. I was stunned and angry. I asked them plainly, why couldn't they help him? Why was this my responsibility? My father looked at me, eyes tired but firm. "We've done what we can. We have our own obligations. You're in the best position now. In other words, it's your turn to clean up the mess we enabled." It didn't matter that James had been bailed out more times than I could count. Didn't matter that I had built my life piece by piece, brick by brick, without leaning on them once. To them, family meant sacrifice. And in their eyes, I owed it because I had succeeded. What they didn't realize is that my success didn't come from luck. Came from being the one they never protected. And now they wanted to punish me for it. Pressure didn't stop. It only got worse. One day it was a voicemail from my aunt in Florida, her voice coated in guilt and disappointment. "Sweetheart," she said, "your parents have done so much for you. And James, he's always had your back, hasn't he? Maybe it's time you stepped up." The next day, it was a Facebook message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Family comes first," she typed, as if those 3 words were an indisputable law. The story had changed, twisted. According to them, my parents had made unimaginable sacrifices to raise me, only to be abandoned in their time of need. James, the selfless brother, had supposedly supported me all my life, and now I was turning my back on him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They made me sound like some heartless miser clutching her coins while her family drowned. But the worst part? They believed it. That narrative, so far from the truth, spread like wildfire. Distant relatives began reaching out, encouraging me to reconsider, do the right thing, and just help out for a little while. Some even suggested I go back to work, just for a few more years until James got back on his feet. I stared at those messages, my chest hollowing out. I had sacrificed so much, my 20s, relationships, comfort, even joy, to build the life I now had. And suddenly, all that work was being reframed as selfishness. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was an ATM with a moral obligation. Claire saw what it was doing to me. She held me when I cried quiet, tired tears I hadn't shed in years. "You don't owe them your peace," she whispered one night, her voice gentle but firm. Not after everything. I knew she was right, but the betrayal still cut deep. Eventually, something inside me snapped, not in anger but in resolve. I needed to confront it. All of it. So I drove to my parents' house without warning. No text. No call ahead. Just me in a quiet car filled with the weight of everything they'd done and refused to see. When I walked through the door, they looked startled but not ashamed. James was already there, lounging on the couch with a drink in hand. My mother stood up with a forced smile. My father nodded like nothing was wrong. They thought I'd come to surrender, to hand over a check, to be the dutiful daughter once more. They were wrong. Before anyone could speak, I raised a hand. "No, I'm not here to debate or discuss," I said calmly. "I'm here to say everything you refuse to hear." Their smiles faded. I started with the manipulation, the way they had twisted the truth to the extended family, the way they painted themselves as victims and me as ungrateful. "You're not being honest," I said to my father. "You're not telling them that James has been bailed out his whole life while I was scraping by on student loans and diner tips." Then I turned to my mother. "You say raising me was a sacrifice. It wasn't. It was your job. That's what parents do. You don't raise a child and keep a tally like they owe you interest." James rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. I turned to him. "Do you remember when I asked you about that business idea I had when I was 20? I asked. You laughed at me. Said I was dreaming too small, that I'd never make it. That moment humiliated me, and I remember thinking, fine, I'll just work harder." He looked away. "You spent your life chasing shiny things, expensive apartments, designer clothes, flashy titles, and now you want me to clean it all up. You never helped me, James. Not once. You only called me when you needed something." My voice didn't shake. I was done being the quiet one. I looked at all of them. You chose to pour your money into his future, and now that it didn't pan out, you want me to fix it. If you had asked respectfully, maybe even just once, I might have considered helping. Maybe. But you didn't ask. You demanded. You guilt-tripped. You manipulated. My mother began to cry. She clutched her chest and sobbed, calling James a misunderstood genius, saying he just needed one more break. That I was cruel for denying him. But I saw it for what it was. A performance. The last-ditch effort to make me feel like the villain. "I'm not buying it," I said softly. "I'm done being the fallback plan." My father started to speak, something about how they were older now and struggling too. He said they had debts of their own, things I wouldn't understand. That now I had to step up. "No," I said simply. "I don't have to do anything. You chose this path. You kept enabling James, and now you're facing the consequences." I stood up. "I'm not giving you money. Not a dollar. And I won't keep defending myself to people who only know your version of the truth. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with respect. Otherwise, this is goodbye." They sat in stunned silence as I walked to the door. James muttered something again, something bitter, probably cruel, but I didn't listen. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Because for the first time, I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking toward myself. After that confrontation, I made a decision I never thought I would, cutting all contact with my parents, James, and every relative who sided with them. There were no more passive-aggressive phone calls, no more long-winded messages blaming me for being ungrateful. Some relatives later reached out with half-hearted apologies, blaming misunderstandings or claiming they had only heard one side. But I didn't need their belated words. I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired, and that not every apology deserves forgiveness. Claire, as always, stood by me. She suggested we take a trip together to reset, to breathe. We chose a quiet coastal town, far from the noise and judgment. There, with the sound of waves and the stillness of mornings, I finally felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom too. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting to be judged, criticized, or used. I was just me. Looking back, I don't regret it. I spent my youth building this life, not so my family could take advantage of it, but so I could live it. I was never the gifted child in their eyes, never the chosen one. But I made something of myself through work, integrity, and sheer will. And that deserves to be protected. Claire and I are now focused on the future, traveling, creating, and living on our own terms. We talk about small projects we want to build together, maybe even starting something that supports young people like me, those who had to walk alone. I'm endlessly thankful for her. Claire didn't love me because I was impressive on paper or because I fulfilled some role. She loved me because she saw me, stood beside me, and never wavered. When my own family questioned my worth, she reminded me of it. And when they turned their backs, she held my hand and never let go. We're planning our next trip soon, maybe somewhere remote, maybe somewhere we've never even heard of. There's a kind of joy in knowing we can go anywhere, be anything, without permission or approval. I'm not afraid of being called selfish or cold anymore. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. Protecting the life we've built isn't bitterness, it's wisdom. I don't know where life will take us next, and that's okay. 'Cause for the first time in a long time, I feel untethered in the best possible way. I've let go of the people who only saw me as a resource, and I'm holding on tightly to the ones who see me as a person. And from now on, that's how I intend to live, free, grounded, and unafraid. 5 lessons I learned that changed my life. Looking back on everything, there are 5 powerful lessons I've carried with me, lessons that came not from books, but from real pain, real growth, and the journey to take back my life. 1. Blood doesn't equal loyalty. Just because someone shares your DNA doesn't mean they have your best interests at heart. I spent too long trying to earn love from people who only saw my value in terms of what I could give them. True loyalty comes from actions, not titles. It's okay to walk away from family when they consistently hurt you. 2. Boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary. I used to feel guilty every time I said no. I thought being a good daughter meant being endlessly available. But boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. They protect your peace, your time, your energy. And anyone who truly respects you will respect those boundaries. 3. Success means nothing without freedom. What's the point of building something amazing if you're trapped by guilt, obligation, or manipulation? I learned that success is only meaningful when you get to enjoy it on your own terms. Freedom, emotional and mental, is the real wealth. For some, apologies come too late. After everything blew up, a few relatives came back with apologies. But they only did it when it was convenient for them, not when I needed it most. Forgiveness is your choice, but you don't owe anyone a second chance just because they finally realized they were wrong. Time reveals who's genuine. 5. Choose the people who choose you. The most powerful part of my story isn't the betrayal, it's the love that followed. Claire stood by me when everything else crumbled. She reminded me that home isn't a place or a family name, it's the people who stand with you in the storm. Choose those people. Love them fiercely. These lessons didn't come easy, but they gave me back my life. If you're listening and going through something similar, remember, you're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to say no. And you deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You're not alone.